Hey guys, welcome back. TJ here with Dead History, and welcome to our next installment here of our Declaration of Independence Signers series. And this is our part 2, looking at the life and legacy of Dr. Lyman Hall, our second signer from the state of Georgia. Of course, yesterday was part 1. We looked at the early life and kind of that time in Connecticut, that really great bonus footage we got for his time in Connecticut and his connection with Connecticut. And now we're going to be basically talking about, hey, his time down in Georgia, that Revolutionary War time period. What was going on down there in Georgia? Of course, he was part of that whole St. John's Parish, Sunbury, Georgia, that whole, community down there. So what was happening? What led up to Lyman Hall becoming involved in politics and, of course, being a member of the Continental Congress and all that sort of thing? So let's jump right into it. I'm not sure how long this episode is going to be. It might only be about a 30-minute long episode or so, but we're going to give you as much information as I can on the legacy and life of Lyman Hall here in this part 2. Let's get to it. The Revolutionary War. On the eve of the American Revolution, St. John's Parish, in which Sunbury was located, was a hotbed of radical sentiment in a predominantly loyalist colony. Though Georgia was not initially represented in the First Continental Congress, through Lyman Hall's influence, the parish was persuaded to send a delegate to Philadelphia to the Second Continental Congress. Lyman Hall was delegated and was admitted to a seat in the Congress in 1775. He was one of the 3 Georgians and one of 4 doctors to sign the Declaration of Independence. The parish of St. John, at an early period of the contest, entered with great spirit into the general opposition of the country against Great Britain, while a majority of the inhabitants of Georgia entertained different sentiments. So widely different were the views and feelings of the people of this parish from those of the inhabitants of the province generally that an almost entire separation took place between them. In July of 1774, the Friends of Liberty held a general meeting at Savannah, where Lyman Hall appeared as a representative of the parish of St. John. The measures, however, adopted at that time fell far short of the wishes both of this patriot and his constituents. In January of 1775, another meeting was held at Savannah, at which it was agreed to petition the king for a redress of grievances and for relief from the arbitrary acts of the British ministry. The parish of St. John, dissatisfied with the temporizing policy of the Savannah Convention, in the following month made application to the Committee of Correspondence in Charleston, South Carolina, to form an alliance with them, by which their trade and commerce should be conducted on the principles of the Non-Importation Association. The patriotic views and feelings of this independent people were highly applauded by the committee, but they found themselves under the necessity by the rules of the Continental Association of declining the alliance. Upon receiving this denial, the inhabitants of St. John agreed to pursue such independent measures as the patriotic principles which they had adopted should appear to justify. Accordingly, they resolved not to purchase slaves imported into Savannah, nor to hold any commercial intercourse with that city, nor with surrounding parishes, unless for the necessaries of life, and these to be purchased by direction of a committee. Having taken this independent stand, they next proceeded to choose a representative to Congress, and on counting the votes, it was found that Dr. Lyman Hall was unanimously elected. In the following May, Dr. Hall appeared in the Hall of Congress and by that body was unanimously admitted to a seat. But as he represented not the colony of Georgia, but only a parish of the colony, it was at the same time resolved to reserve the question as to his right to vote for the further deliberation of the Congress. The above question at length coming before the House on the occasion of Congress taking the opinions of its members by colonies, Lyman Hall expressed his willingness to give his vote only in those cases in which the sentiments of Congress were not taken by colonies. Fortunately for the cause of liberty, on the 15th of July of 1775, the Convention of Georgia acceded to the General Confederacy and proceeded to the appointment of 5 delegates to Congress, 3 of whom attended at the adjourned meeting of that body, September 13th of 1775. Among the delegates thus appointed, Dr. Hall was one. To this station, he was annually re-elected until 1780, at the close of which year he finally retired from the national legislature. At length, Georgia fell temporarily into the power of the British. On this event, Lyman Hall removed his family to the north and suffered the confiscation of all of his property by the British government, established in the state. In 1782, he returned to Georgia, and in the following year was elected to the chief magistrate of the state. After enjoying this office for a time, he retired from the cares of public life, and about the 60th year of his age, he died at his residence in the county of Burke, whither he had removed. Now, that's one source that I'm obviously reading from. I'm going to read from another source who gives even more interesting perspective of all this. In 1765, the colonies had come under additional pressure from Britain. However, Georgia remained more closely aligned with the mother country than the other colonies. Nonetheless, by that time, many of the colonists had already begun to resist the British tactics, particularly after passage of the Stamp Act. Lyman Hall's activities as a conspicuous leader of the Patriots did not find great favor with the royal governor, James Wright, who became familiar with the name Dr. Lyman Hall and with the man. Nevertheless, Lyman Hall found no reason to restrict his activities. His political activity thrust him into the forefront of the resistance to actions by the British that the colonists found oppressive. He participated in the meetings held in Savannah during 1774 to 1775. In St. John's Parish, the sentiments of the residents, primarily Puritans, were strong in support of the Patriots' cause, but the parish stood alone. During December of 1774, the Patriots of St. John's Parish moved to secede from Georgia and join with South Carolina, and during that same month acted to ratify the acts of the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia. Nevertheless, South Carolina declined accepting the parish. In March of 1775, St. John's Parish held its convention and elected Lyman Hall as its delegate to Congress. At the time, intercourse with Georgia, except for St. John's Parish, had already been prohibited by Congress. Savannah was considered a loyalist stronghold, but it was also home to a few steadfast patriots, including George Walton. Lyman Hall, while at Congress, remained a non-voting member because he represented only one parish. Subsequently, on September 13th of 1775, following a meeting of the Georgia Provisional Government during July, when the colony selected delegates, 3 Georgians, Button Gwinnett, Lyman Hall, and George Walton, took their seats in the Second Continental Congress. Back in Georgia, the situation was rapidly changing. On January 11th of 1776, subsequent to the arrest of the royal governor James Wright, Colonel Lachlan McIntosh was ordered by the Council of Safety to prepare for a possible invasion by the British. At the same time, political problems emerged within the ranks of the Patriots in Georgia due to ever-growing friction between McIntosh and Button Gwinnett, the latter frustrated due to not receiving command of the militia. We learned that in the Button Gwinnett video series we did, of course. Nonetheless, on February 2nd of 1776, the Georgia delegates to the Second Continental Congress, Archibald Bullock, Button Gwinnett, Lyman Hall, John Houston, and George Walton were selected by the Provincial Congress. Dr. Hall and his close friend Button Gwinnett were seated on May 20th, but Bullock remained in Georgia as President of Council. Another delegate, the Reverend Zubley, a holdover from the previous year, was caught corresponding with the royal governor and exposed on the floor of Congress by Samuel Chase, just prior to the vote for independence. He escaped from Philadelphia, and John Houston was ordered to give chase and apprehend him. Consequently, Houston, a strong proponent of the Declaration, missed the vote on independence, and Zubley escaped. Dr. Hall, Button Gwinnett, and George Walton voted in the affirmative and later added their names to the parchment document. On December 20th of that year, 1776, Lyman Hall and 4 other delegates, Nathan Brownson, Button Gwinnett, John Houston, and George Walton, arrived at Congress, which had convened in Baltimore. Dr. Hall was re-elected to Congress through 1780. However, due to a request from Gwinnett, Hall returned to Georgia to support his friend. Gwinnett had become President of Council during March of 1777, subsequent to the death of Bullock. Button Gwinnett died after a duel with General Lachlan McIntosh during May of that year, and Lyman Hall was named executor of Gwinnett's will. The task was overwhelming due to the complicated estate of Gwinnett. Dr. Hall was in Georgia when the British invaded during 1778, but he escaped capture by moving to Charleston. Soon after the invasion, the British controlled the coast of Georgia, permitting them to initiate ravaging raids. On January 2nd of 1779, while Savannah was controlled by Hessian troops, a British force advanced to reduce Fort Morris at Sunbury, defended by only about 200 troops. The Americans, unable to neutralize the British artillery and the overwhelming force, including regulars and loyalists, of about 2,000, capitulated. The British destroyed Lyman Hall's home in Sunbury and devastated Hall's Knoll. Charleston fell on May 12th of 1780 after a long siege, but Lyman Hall again escaped capture and possible hanging by fleeing to Connecticut before the city surrendered. Lyman Hall remained in Connecticut until 1782. At that time, after the British were compelled to abandon Georgia, he returned home. The next year, Lyman Hall was elected to the Georgia State Assembly, where he served for 1 year. In 1784, Lyman Hall was elected governor of Georgia, and 1 year later, during 1785, he returned to the House of Assembly. He remained in the House for a year before leaving public life for retirement. Dr. Lyman Hall remained in Savannah until 1790, when he moved to a place below Augusta in Burke County to settle on his new property, Shell Bluff Plantation, located along the Savannah River. It was the last move he would make. Lyman Hall succumbed at age 66 on October 19th of 1790, usually a day of grand celebration in Savannah, known as Victory Day, because it was on that day, during 1781, that Lord Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown. More than 60 years had passed since the death of Lyman Hall. The people of Georgia erected a monument in Augusta to honor their three favorite sons, Button Gwinnett, Lyman Hall, and George Walton, each of whom had pledged their lives, fortune, and sacred honor during the War for Independence, then voted for and adopted the Declaration of Independence on July 4th of 1776, and afterward signed their names to the parchment document. In addition to the monument, their remains were reinterred there. However, to this day, there is no evidence to verify that Button Gwinnett's remains are there. The original stone that marked Lyman Hall's gravesite was later transferred to Connecticut. The solemn marker was placed in a public cemetery in Wallingford, where he was born. The epitaph on the tombstone proudly proclaimed him a patriot and underscored the description with, "A true Christian and an honest man." Lyman Hall's widow, Mary, lived several years longer. She succumbed during 1793, outliving both her husband and their only child, John, who predeceased his parents. John Hall had married Laura Walcott, and together they had a son named Lyman after his grandfather. He died while serving as a captain in the Massachusetts militia on January 14th of 1807. Dr. Lyman Hall, in his person, was tall and well-proportioned. In his manners he was easy, and in his deportment dignified and courteous. He was by nature characterized for a warm and enthusiastic disposition, which, however, was under the guidance of a sound discretion. His mind was active and discriminating. Ardent in his own feelings, he possessed the power of exciting others to action. And though in Congress he acted not so conspicuous a part as many others, yet his example and his exertions, especially in connection with those of the inhabitants of the circumscribed parish of St. John, powerfully contributed to the final accession of the whole colony of Georgia to the Confederacy, thus presenting, in array against the mother country, the whole number of her American colonies. Another source I read said that it was May 13th of 1775 when Lyman Hall arrived in Philadelphia and presented his credentials on behalf of the parish of St. John to the Continental Congress. Pretty interesting stuff. It's interesting how some of these have the exact dates. Some sources don't. It's interesting. When he fled from Savannah, Georgia, it was actually on the advice of General Washington to take his wife and son and flee up to Connecticut. So for nearly 2 years, he was absent and suffered great financial loss from the British confiscation of his home, plantation, and his slaves. He quietly resumed the practice of medicine in Savannah upon his return in 1782. Free at last, while thus quietly employed, his leadership was sought once again, and in January 1783 he was elected governor of the state of Georgia. While all were rejoicing the blessings of independence and the removal of the hated British troops, poverty, sorrow, and desolation were the heritage of many homes in Georgia. He had agreed to serve for only 1 year, so the energies of his administration were chiefly directed to establishment of land offices and sale of confiscated property, to the arrangement of the public debt, to the rewarding of officers and soldiers with bounty warrants for services rendered, to working toward the accommodation of differences and preventing disturbances with Florida, to the establishment of courts and schools, and most importantly, with the consummation of treaties of cession and friendship with Cherokee and Creek Indians. All that, and there were no in-place bureaus and departments of aids to formulate and carry out the plans to accomplish it. On July 8th of 1783, Governor Lyman Hall convened the legislature in Augusta and called upon them to enact wholesome laws restraining vice and to encourage the introduction of religion and learned clergy to perform divine worship in honor of God, and to cultivate the principles of religion and virtue among our citizens. He also called on them to grant tracts of land and endow the institutions of learning. This early and wise suggestion paved the way for the foundation and sustentation of the University of Georgia, which became the parent of higher education and civilization in Georgia. Upon the conclusion of this service, Lyman Hall resumed his medical practice in Savannah and held no further public office. He evidently prospered in the next few years, as in 1790 he moved to Burke County and purchased a fine plantation on a bluff overlooking the Savannah River. It was there that he died on October 19th of 1790 in his 67th year, leaving a widow, Mary, and an unmarried and childless son, John, both of whom died within a year of his death. Now that's his 67th year. I read that it was his 66th year, so I don't know if he was 66, 67. And then it says an unmarried and childless son, John, but we just learned that his son, John, actually did marry. Interesting. All were buried in a substantial brick vault on his land overlooking the Savannah River, and there he rested until 1848, when his remains were brought to Augusta and buried underneath a magnificent monument erected by patriotic citizens in front of the courthouse, honoring the three signers from Georgia of the Declaration of Independence: Lyman Hall, Button Gwinnett, and George Walton. There is a cenotaph and Lyman Hall High School in his birthtown of Wallingford, Connecticut, honoring his life and accomplishments. Georgia also named a county in his honor in 1818. There are no direct descendants of this great patriot. Near the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., there is a park dedicated to the signers of the Declaration. A granite block is there, engraved with the name of Lyman Hall. Lyman Hall is shown in the top row, third from the left. It's in the rotunda of the National Archives building. There's a mural painting of several of the signers. It's actually by Barry Faulkner, and he's shown in the top row, third from the left, in that painting. So interesting stuff there. Just one more little thing. In January 1779, Sunbury was burned by the British. Hall's family fled to the north, where they remained until the British evacuation in 1782. Lyman Hall then returned to Georgia, settling in Savannah. January 1783, he was elected governor. He held that position for a year. While governor, Hall advocated the chartering of a state university, believing that education, particularly religious education, would result in a more virtuous citizenry. His efforts led to the chartering of the University of Georgia in 1785. At the expiration of his term as government, he resumed his medical practice. 1790, Hall moved to a plantation in Burke County, Georgia, on the South Carolina border, where he died on October 19th, at the age of 66. And then Hall's widow died in November of 1793. Lyman Hall's memorialized in Georgia, where Hall County, Georgia bears his name, and in Connecticut, in his native state, where their town of Wallingford honored him by naming a high school after its distinguished native son. Elementary schools in Liberty County, Georgia, and in Hall County, Georgia, are also named for him. The Signers Monument is in Augusta. That memorializes him and the two others, and his remains were reinterred there in 1848 after being exhumed from his original grave on his plantation in Burke County, Georgia. So now as far as Lyman Hall's gravesite. So I did not see, so I'm going to show you guys on the screen, there's a bunch of historical markers. There's like 2 or 3 of them at least in Georgia that talk about Lyman Hall. They talk about Hall's Knoll. That was his plantation. I believe that was his first plantation, though. The one that the British seized and destroyed. So I'm pretty sure that was his first plantation. Then the one that they talk about that he died at, that was called, was it something Shelf? I'm trying to find the exact name of it for you guys. I just read it a minute ago, and now it's escaping me. Silly me. Yes, Shell Bluff Plantation. That's in Burke County, Georgia. Now, I'm pretty sure Burke County is the county that Augusta, Georgia is in, but I could be wrong on that, but I think it is. But I might be wrong. I'm actually trying to look it up real quick for you guys. So no, Augusta is actually in Augusta-Richmond County, Georgia. But Augusta is not far from the South Carolina border either. In Burke County, where his plantation was that he died at, Shell Bluff Plantation, that was right on the South Carolina border as well. So I don't even know if there is, and I'm going to look it up, and if there is, you'll see it on the screen here. But I know there's road sign markers and historical markers for Hall's Knoll, which was his original plantation in Sunbury. But I don't think that there's any sort of historical marker for Shell's Bluff. Like, to say Shell's Bluff Plantation, owned by Dr. Lyman Hall, was in this vicinity, was in this area. I don't think there is. So I never visited any of these historical markers anyway. I did visit. Now, keep in mind, Shell Bluff Plantation in Burke County, Georgia is where he was originally buried. When he died, he was buried there for actually quite a long time. He died in 1790, and then he was reinterred to where he's at now in 1848. So you're talking like almost 60 years. You're talking like 58 years. He was buried on his plantation, that Shell Bluff Plantation in Burke County, Georgia. So it was quite a long time before he was reinterred. Now, the pictures I'm going to show you in the bonus footage after this real quick are my photos of the Signers Monument, where Lyman Hall's remains are to this day. That's where he was reinterred. Now, listen, I've always been on record, anybody that's ever watched any of my presentations or talks about this stuff, I've never been a big fan of this monument or this gravesite. Now, we know Button Gwinnett, he's probably not buried there. He's probably still in that cemetery in Savannah. But Lyman Hall and George Walton, 100%, their remains were reinterred to this, underneath where this monument is. So they are definitely there in present day. I mean, listen, it's a very tall, huge obelisk monument. I mean, it's cool. It's very nice that they have a monument memorializing the 3 signers. I think that's very cool. But it's literally in the middle of a street in Augusta. Like, it's right across from the courthouse and everything. It's just odd. It's just like, like, hey, let's go have breakfast at the cafe, and we're gonna drive right over Lyman Hall and George Walton. It's like literally in the middle of a street. It's just strange. I don't love it. Some people do like it. That's great. I'm not a huge fan, but I'm gonna show you those pictures in the bonus footage, of course. So there you go, guys. That's pretty much it. That's a look at the life, legacy, the death, and the final burying spot of Dr. Lyman Hall. one of, I believe it was 4 physicians to sign the Declaration of Independence. Our second signer from the state of Georgia. Stay tuned for next week because we will look at our third and final signer from the state of Georgia, George Walton. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Thank you so much for being patient. I know it was a pain in the neck, us taking 2 weeks off. I really appreciate you guys sticking with us and being patient. Of course, thank you for all the subscribes, the likes, the comments, questions, all of it. Thank you so much. Keep it all coming. Stay tuned for the bonus footage so you can see my photos from my visit to the Signers Monument there in Augusta, Georgia. And there you go. We'll see you next week for our Georgia conclusion of the Declaration of Independence Signer series when we look at George Walton. See you next week, guys. Bye-bye now.
Hey guys, how's it going? So I'm going to try something out here, see if this works. So bear with me. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see this. This is the Find a Grave page for Lyman Hall. And of course we know where he's buried in Augusta, the courthouse grounds. So if you go to where his son is, this is the research I did. So that's his only son. Notice it says Hall Family Cemetery right here in Burke County. Now, there's no photos, nothing, but there's an inscription. Here rise the ashes of a youth, blah, blah, blah. So it's interesting. Now, if you click on Hall Family Cemetery, it actually tells you Burke County and the description. Cemetery located at Shell Bluff, Georgia, on a bluff about 1 mile below Shell Bluff Landing, Savannah River, Burke County, Georgia, 25 miles southeast of Augusta, Georgia. So now, here's the interesting thing. I took the coordinates and I looked it up, and if you take a look here at Google Earth, let me actually go back to that little coordinate though. So there you go. Now the cool thing is, if you zoom out, there's the Savannah River. Here's South Carolina. We knew that it was definitely on the border of South Carolina and Georgia. This road right here is actually named Shell Bluff Road. Trying to see if it'll actually show it. Here, you know what? Watch this. If I do this and I go here, you'll actually see where this road name is. See? Shell Bluff Landing Road. So as you can see, it's all just like woods. It's pretty desolate. Now the interesting thing is, if we go to that actual coordinate, which was right here, it says that that is where the actual cemetery is. So it's like a dirt road here. So see, you got that Shell Bluff Landing Road. This is Shell Bluff itself, right by the Savannah River. So the estate, the plantation, probably sat somewhere like right out here where my cursor is. And this, you'll see it's a dirt road off of, as a matter of fact, let's zoom in again. We'll go right here to where that dirt road looks to be. It looks like, not that one, the other side, right here. If you go down this dirt road, which looks like it is accessible to a vehicle, you will end up where apparently the coordinates are for the Hall Family Cemetery, which includes, by the way, just so everyone can see, his son and Mary Osborne Hall, which I believe that's the daughter of Samuel and Hannah Osborne. So I'm not exactly sure who that is, but then there's Thomas Drisdom. But that is where it would be. There's nothing I can zoom in on. You can see it's pretty blurry. You can't really see anything. But that's pretty cool. So the original burial site of Lyman Hall was probably right in here somewhere, right around this general area. And again, Shell Bluff Landing Road, right here where my cursor is. And then, of course, the Savannah River. So we know that. We know it was on the border of South Carolina and Georgia, right on the Savannah. We know it was Shell Bluff Plantation. I would beg to guess that it was right in this area where the plantation was. And that's where they have a small little family cemetery. That's where his son still is buried to this day. His son's remains are still there. And that is where Lyman himself was originally buried. And then he was reinterred to, of course, what we know. If we go back here to the courthouse, where you guys have seen the courthouse monument and all that stuff. So pretty cool stuff. I found that interesting. I wish I lived closer to Georgia. Unfortunately, this is probably about I don't even know how long. I bet you this is like a 14-hour drive for me. Let's just kind of see, just to have fun with it. I bet you it's 14 hours. So if I go there, directions, my location, it's got to be like 14 hours. All right, I'm sorry, I was a little off. 11 and a half from where I'm at up here in Jersey, and this is where those coordinates are. So you'll see there's the South Carolina borderline, this dotted line, and then there's Augusta, and like it said, about 25 miles south, which that looks about right on that South Carolina border, that is where it would be. I wish I lived closer because I would love to go take a ride and try to see what I could find back there. But there you go, guys. That's probably where the original burial site of Lyman Hall once was. So pretty cool stuff. I just wanted to show you that. I found that to be quite interesting. There you go, guys. Thanks so much.